So welcome to this Faith in Older People workshop. And welcome to Maureen, and thank you very much, Maureen, for joining us. It's very good to have Maureen with us to actually speak about this with some authority rather than the dabbling around that we do. Maureen's worked in the voluntary sector for 40 years in Scotland, both as a staff member and a trustee of charities. The organisations that she's worked for have encompassed mental health, older people, health, community development, and she is the director of Faith in Older People. Faith in Older People is a voluntary organisation which aims to strengthen understanding of the importance of the spiritual dimension of lives of older people and those who care for them. Alongside this, Maureen is also a trustee of Voluntary Health Scotland, a day centre, Scottish Partnership on Palliative Care, and the Royal Society for the Sport of Women in Scotland. And I think that it's time for me to
thank you very much, Alex, and it's really nice to be here. When you said authority, I was looking around and thinking, actually, those in this session have probably got a lot more authority around spiritual care and faith than perhaps I do. So it's a good opportunity to share ideas, though. And so I think, as it's a relatively small group, please do interrupt if you wish at any time. We can pursue any questions that you have as we go along, so that we can, generate a good discussion. Because I think it's in the discussion that we find out about each other and what we want to achieve. So I'm hoping very much that the technology will let me immediately go to screen share. I think I was very interested when I was thinking about Godly Play, and I was looking at your website, how the founder talked about spiritual maturity. And I thought that was one of the things that would be really interesting to think about, because my understanding was it was generating an understanding of faith and spirituality from an early age so that you grew into it. And I think our contention would be that you always continue to grow, and so that whatever age you are, so there's an opportunity to continue developing that maturity. So that was a question I'd like to put back to you when we have the discussion. And I think the other link, which is really important, is about storytelling. I think fundamentally we need to know about each other. We need to know each other's history, and we need to see that in relationship to those around us. So in a way, there are elements of the sort of spiritual care approach that FEOP has, and the Godly Play approach, where you combine those sort of storytellings to better understand each other. So they're very much intertwined. In the session, I wanted to do a couple of things, tell you about our approach to spiritual care, and a bit about the sort of general work that we do, but also to highlight the fact that we have a number of different projects underneath which is how spiritual care impacts on them. I'm not going to do that. It's not. Yes, it is. So just to look at the organisation, we're a small voluntary organisation. We work across Scotland, and what the pandemic has done is allowed us, because of Zoom, to generate a lot of contacts in other parts of the UK and Canada and America, as it happens, which has been a really wonderful experience. So whilst we can only see each other's shoulders, we have at least talked to each other in different places and learned a lot from others. Our origins are with Malcolm Goldsmith, who is an Episcopal priest, and he worked a lot with older people with dementia. And one of the things he felt really passionately about was how older people, if they are experiencing diminishments, tend to withdraw from congregations. and not get followed up. And so he put in place in his congregation someone who had a real focus on the older people in the congregation and their spiritual needs. And he felt that if they could do it in one congregation, we should be trying to encourage and provide resources to others to do it. And that was the origins of Faith in Older People, built up around a kitchen table. And I'm happy to say that 14 years later, we are still here. We're very small, there are 2 of us, we're part-time. We absolutely rely on collaboration. Collaboration is key for us because we bring in and work with people who have very strong experience in different sectors. And I think that that's been hugely beneficial to us and enhanced the work that we do. We have a very active board, which is drawn from those of faith and those of none. We're not a religious organisation. We work very closely with faith communities, though. Our board chairman at the moment is Bob Brendel, who some of you might know as the previous CEO at the Eric Liddell Centre. So Alex has already pointed out what our key aim is, which is to build a stronger understanding of the importance of the spiritual dimension to the well-being of older people. So in doing this, we work with the NHS chaplaincy, we work with health and social care staff, we've done a number of projects in care homes with care at home staff, and a lot of education research around it, but I'll come back to that. But we also want to celebrate older people and their role in faith communities. And I think this is really important because sometimes I certainly feel that round the table when policies are being discussed at Scottish Government level, the role of faith communities isn't necessarily taken into account, or the range of services, both spiritual and practical, that are offered by faith communities. And I think during the pandemic, faith communities offered a huge amount of service to the community on the one hand, and were not able, on the other hand, to enable worship in person or to go to care homes, which I'm sure, well, I think the impact was quite significant that wasn't able to take place. So one of the projects we're doing at the moment is to look at the really amazing contribution older people make in their faith communities in all sorts of different respects. And we're calling it the gift of age. And so I'll probably speak a bit more about that. So these are our 2 key aims. But spiritual care itself, is sometimes it's complex for people to understand, and sometimes it feels very easy. And there are lots and lots of different interpretations, definitions. So these are probably my 3 favorites, because I think they give a real feeling of what it is we're trying to achieve, what it is we're trying to understand in relation to an individual's life. But you could look at all sorts of definitions, and please do wave at me if all this is terribly familiar and you'd like to move on. But actually, people's understanding of spiritual care and how it pertains to individuals is very rich and varied. But meaning and purpose is absolutely fundamental to them all. What is it that really matters to us? Why do we want to get up in the morning? Why do we want to feel needed? Why do we want to be with other people? And what is it that it would mean to us if those things were taken away? And I think the pandemic has highlighted very significantly the kind of impact that it has. But it's also about who we are, how we relate to other people. You know, what sort of cultural backgrounds do we come from? What are our expectations? And it can be a faith or not. And for some people, the spiritual dimension is very much to do with nature or music or creativity and relationship with others, about friendship. And I think these three definitions from different people at different times absolutely highlight those elements in it. I think it's often been described as the essence of us. What is it that makes us individual, and what is it that helps us to build our own resilience against the things that we have to confront throughout our lives? And maybe you could share something when we go into discussion about why your spiritual life matters to you, and what is it that gives you sort of meaning and purpose. I mean, I'm very struck, and Jane will probably know a lot more because she's involved with a care home, is about that, what the pandemic did when everything had to close down for care homes, and the ability to be in relationship with more than the people immediately around you, and the loss of that close family presence that is really important, or in fact the spiritual care in terms of faith that might come in that was no longer possible during that time. So when faced with that and a sense of great isolation, I think we need to think very carefully how we manage these things for the future. I just wanted to share a different sort of quote, because I think it's from the chaplaincy in NHS Scotland, which I think also brings together those three elements. A person's spirituality is not separate from the body, the mind, or material reality, for it's their inner life. And I think the inner life part is really important. It's the practice of loving kindness, empathy, and tolerance in daily life. It's a feeling of solidarity with our fellow humans while helping to alleviate their suffering. On a personal basis, it brings a sense of peace, harmony, and conviviality. It's the essence and significance behind all our moral values and virtues, such as benevolence, compassion, honesty, sympathy, respect, forgiveness, integrity, loving kindness towards strangers, and respect for the world around us. I think they're very powerful statements and give us a lot of food for thought about how we interpret and fit in with these things. So why does spiritual care matter? It matters, I think, a lot if we really take it seriously. And for FEOP, it's really important that it's seen as an integral part of person-centered care. And you can see from the World Health Organization that that we should look at the physical, psychological, social, and spiritual well-being of individuals. It's much acknowledged through research that acknowledging and recognizing the spiritual dimension helps to sustain individuals, which is beyond medicine, and especially at end of life. It's more than, it's how have we built our coping skills? Who do we turn to? How can we embrace something that is wider than ourselves? But it also supports those who care for us. And so I've said, we've witnessed the impact of the pandemic. And it's really important because very often in this situation, it was the staff in the care home were sort of surrogate family and also delivering spiritual care through loving kindness, through compassion, and through presence, which wasn't possible for those out with the home. One of the things we did during the pandemic was to set up a listening service for the care home staff and care at home staff. So they had somewhere to go in order to talk about the impact that was separate from management, separate from home, and just somewhere to let off steam. So I think there were a lot of support services for staff And one of the things we feel very strongly about is that the spiritual dimension needs to include staff, both through a better understanding of what spiritual care means, which is what FEOP tries to do, but also that they have the possibility of seeing how it builds their resilience for themselves, in which case we hope it will help to understand, what matters to an individual. I talk about what matters a lot because it's used in Scottish Government and it's used in assessments for people who are residents in care homes and who receive care at home, so that care staff get to understand what matters to the person they're caring for. And it's not a simple thing. We feel it's a very important element and needs discussion and needs to be involving other people around them. So that's where we want that to come from. So it's increasingly acknowledged in policy papers, but it's one thing being in a policy paper, but it's quite another thing to make sure that there is implementation of a spiritual care awareness, a spiritual care strategy, and who supports that, and how do we educate people. This is the definition of spiritual and religious care that's adopted in the NHS chaplaincy. Spiritual care is given in a one-to-one relationship that's person-centered and doesn't make assumptions about personal conviction or life orientation. Religious care is given in the context of shared belief, values, and liturgies. And spiritual care is not, as it says, religious necessarily, but religious care should always be spiritual. But if people only talk about spiritual care, they must acknowledge, in our view, that for some, it's religion that's fundamental to supporting them. I think what we found when we've talked to lots of people in care homes and talked to students who are nurses or health and social care staff, that there's a perception that spiritual care is only about religion. And the assumption is, well, we don't do religion here, and shut the door, metaphorically, well, and physically, as it happens sometimes, because they can't see the wider importance that it has to you and I and anyone else in sustaining them and maintaining their sense of purpose through their lives. So it's really important that we get over this, the fact that it's all embracing, and it's not about me as a carer, it's about me in relation to you and what your needs are. And I might not be able to answer religious questions or existential questions, but I need to understand that they're important to people and to find a way of enabling that relationship with someone else to come about. One of the things we've been doing recently is doing research on the curriculum for nurses in universities and with health and social care staff in further education colleges. And it's fascinating. Have a very broad curriculum, and there's not one mention of religion or spiritual in these curriculum, which sort of surprised us, but disappointed us in a way, because if the policies around us are about being body, mind, and spirit, it was we thought it was a lack that needs to be addressed. And one of the things really that comes out of it, which I hope we'll go on and maybe have a bit of a discussion about, is the use of language. Why aren't we explicit? What is it that sets up barriers to talking about spiritual and religion? Why are we anxious, or apparently anxious, about the terminology in the first place, and then what matters underneath that? So we found in most of the curricula that a lot about compassion, a lot about well-being, a lot about person-centered care, but as I said, no direct mention of this. And I think if that's what happens when people are being educated, that will go right through their practice when they go onto the wards or go into care homes to support people. And we need to think about why it is we don't use the direct terminology, but use other forms of words. So I would love to get your thoughts back on that. So the policy context, this is Scottish Government policy. I just wanted to illustrate some of the things, some of the policies that do mention the spiritual dimension, but again, it's how it's sort of followed through. And I suppose there's both a spiritual and a religious dimension, although it's not about the theology very often, it's about how faith communities interact with different policies. So these are the ones that, you know, are highlighted specifically. Some of them, for instance, the palliative care strategy, which I'll show you the extract from, clearly says spiritual care is really important. And when people are in training, spiritual care is mentioned more in terms of specialist palliative care than it is in general training. And the same with mental health. But I was interested in a meeting I went to the other day that actually faith communities are now being invited to be present in discussions on policy, which is really important because, as I'm sure all of you are aware, a lot of congregations offer very practical support to the wider community. Dementia cafes, food banks, lunch clubs, all sorts of things are offered through faith communities. And what we want as an organisation in conjunction with others is to make sure that this contribution is highlighted at government level and that the voice of congregations is there. So I think there's a difference, you know, the First Minister meets with church leaders, faith community leaders, at least once a year. But actually at the table where things are being discussed at a local level, it's really important that congregations of different faiths are included in those discussions so people can see how they contribute. And it also goes over the barriers of what is religious and what is spiritual and what is a compassionate approach to the community. It's strange. The voluntary sector thinks that churches and faith communities are cared for and consulted over there, so they don't include them. And the Scottish Government sometimes makes the assumption that it's all in the voluntary sector. And I would say that I think faith communities have a special place and need to be taken into account for that basis. Just to show you that in terms of the World Health Organizations, it's very clear that the value of the spiritual elements is very important in terms of a holistic view of the care that we offer. And I think it's the non-material bit here, and it's the connections that are important. I don't know how many of you have had the chance to read On Being Mortal, written by Atul Gawande, because I think if you read it, this just encompasses, and his book encompasses the importance of needing to move, not to exclude medication or anything like that, that's not what he's saying, but actually to move from cure and the expectation that everything can be cured to looking at how we give compassionate care in the roundest possible way. Always do the wrong thing. And this is the palliative care delivery plan. At the moment it's being revamped, but it includes spiritual, and certainly Faith in Older People has contributed to the background review, which emphasises both spiritual care as it is offered, but also spiritual care education in order to make that offering more important, as important as the other elements. And faith in older people, alongside Scottish Care and the chaplaincy, in responding to the current consultation on a new national care service, has emphasised very strongly that spiritual care needs to be on equal par with other elements of care, and that needs to embrace support to staff and support to education wherever that is provided. I'm going to do it again. Underpinning of all the approaches in Scotland certainly is the basis of human rights. They underpin the health and social care standards in looking at different rights to respect religion, and so on, regardless of whether you are, what age you are, what faith you are, and so on. There's a lot of statements, and I'm sure Jane is very aware of the National Health and Social Care Standards in relation to, sorry, I've done it again, in relation to running a care home. But it's all about high quality care that's right for me, and we would contend that, and that has to include spiritual care. So what has our research shown? And I'll just zap through this because I know we've got not a lot of time. But I think for us, it's very important that we understand ourselves. And when I've spoken to staff in care homes, and they begin to think about what matters to them, what would they miss if they were a resident? What would they still wish to be there? What sort of routines would they like to have, and so on? That's a key element of understanding ourselves. But I must acknowledge that, and from our research and talking to care home staff across Scotland, that they do provide spiritual care, but they don't think of it in those terms. But they look at, the kind of friendship, well, I know there are boundaries, but the compassion that they show, the interest, the understanding of what matters to someone, the time that people take. And time is such a precious commodity when nurses and health and social care staff are caring for folk. And we have a little saying, because it came out of the research, is understanding those sync moments. And it could be spelled S-I-N-K or S-Y-N-C, where you could be helping someone have a bath or helping someone to eat, where they say something that really matters to them, and we mustn't lose that moment. So it's not about, this is a special task that we do somewhere else. This is how we do everyday tasks. And I think often care home staff and others are not conscious that they're doing that, and often they do it very well. I've covered, the language barrier, and perhaps we can come back to that. And I think it's about making sure that we keep the spirit alive, that we think about ways of supporting somebody holistically. This is a quote from one of the care home staff, and this was her understanding of what spiritual care meant, both from our conversation and because it's how she felt about it. Obviously, after all this practice, wheeling my little wheel backwards and forwards, I still haven't got the right message. I don't see spiritual care solely related to religion at all. It must be seen as people must be seen as a whole individual, and how that is promoted through different tasks and different attitudes. So these are just snapshots that have come out of the different research that we've done. So that's mostly about spiritual care, and there's lots of very super books that that consider all the issues. So that is very much a snapshot. So these are FEOP's current themes. Underpinning them all, of course, is spiritual care as it relates to education, as it relates to implementation. What are the sort of theological approaches to supporting people in different circumstances? So we're looking at enduring mental health challenges in the church. And we had John Swinton to give us a really excellent seminar looking at the theological underpinnings of that. And we then went on to look at chaplaincy. We then looked at pastoral care, and we looked at mental health at end of life, as well as having a session that looked at attitudes across different faiths. We're working with the Scottish Partnership on Palliative Care about how do we look at compassionate communities, and we had some super examples recently of compassionate Inverclyde and compassionate North Berwick, who have very different approaches. And obviously the major theme is caring for people at end of life, but also as people are discharged from hospital and how to support them in those first days. We're doing a lot of research on spiritual care education. We've had a long-standing project on supporting faith communities around understanding dementia. So that includes attitudes, the environment in which people worship and what could happen, worship itself, and the kind of connections with other organizations that perhaps are a specialist in dementia. And then we have our Gift of Age project, which is looking at the contribution of older people to faith communities and to the wider community. And we'll be doing a survey early next year about this. I'm sort of aware there are themes that come together between godly play and faith in older people, because they're both about helping to understand someone's story and how faith is intertwined with that. But it probably brings its challenges too. So it'd be nice to have a discussion how you might put these things together, and how there might be more interaction between our organizations in terms of themes. So I go back to your founder's theme about spiritual maturity, which I thought was just lovely. So thank you, Alex. And there's our resource list at the end. So, okay.
Thank you very much.
I hope that's what you expected.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's loads of things to think about in there. I will put Maureen's slides presentation up onto Hoover for you all to have a look at after this. There's loads in there. I guess, do we want to have a chat? Have you got questions? I put some things into the chat that I thought of at the time, and I've written lots of things down. So you can start with me if you want, but yeah.
I'll just take it as it comes.
Can I just say thank you very much, Maureen? I thought that was really helpful, because it just reinforces everything that's going through my head right now. So thank you. Lots to think about too.
I think there is, and one of the things that strikes me is because we have to spend so much time on the physical very often, we forget how important it is to give ourselves space to think about the other elements.
I mean, this isn't a godly play comment, but a friend of mine asked me to watch the Ed Balls programs. I don't know if you've seen the 2 Ed Balls programs.
I saw one
about care in crisis, or crisis, whatever it was called, because he's a home carer. He has sole 24-hour care of his wife. And I watched one yesterday afternoon, the second one yesterday afternoon, and what struck me the most all the way through was exactly what you were saying is, you know, it's all very well slapping a meal down in front of somebody or giving them a wash, but what people are missing so much is contact, compassion, kindness, conversation, all the things that we take for granted. Really was struck by that, particularly in the home care setting, but obviously, and for us, I suppose in the nursing home context, the pandemic was just horrendous, really. Just the lack, you know, not being able to set foot inside a home for over a year was really hard. So yeah, sorry, just a comment really.
But what I took, well, and from what Jane's just said, but also what I took from reading about godly play was the importance of relationship. You know, it's, you know, when you talked about children, they're in a circle and they're thinking about what they've been told and then played about. And if you take that away, you don't get the whole person, because we get a sense of who we are from interacting with other people. And I think that was what was really, well, tragic for care homes and for people at home whose care was withdrawn and somebody popped a meal in twice a day kind of thing. It's so I think there's a big learning exercise in that about how important interdependence is, as well as wanting autonomy of choice. It's difficult.
Do you know, the best experience I've had recently of the kind of relationship stuff is I went to get my booster vaccine in Braeburn, and the residents, the staff and the directors were all sitting in a big circle in one room. And it was just the most amazing experience, because the residents felt they were part, you know, even without language or without much, they felt they were part of, we were all in the same boat, you know, we were all waiting for the vaccine and we were all talking to each other. And although some of them were, you know, moving around or not really, that you could see how just the physical contact and the relationship and the people talking to one another, including them, absolutely lifted the whole. Sorry, that's completely irrelevant, but it really struck me that that's about joint, you know, it's about sharing, about joint experiences.
It's that feeling of being in community. Sorry, Maureen.
Yeah, it's community.
Yeah.
My almost 100% of my godly play experience is with adults and with people, older people, and I've done almost none with children. But I've done lots and lots in worship and lots with older people. What I'm finding at the moment in my new context is resistance to the word godly play. 2 people said to me last week, but if you do it with residents in a care home, is it not patronising? Alex, can you comment on that? I mean, I just say, no, it's not. Of course it's not. And people who've done it appreciate it, but there's a sort of concept somewhere that because it's aimed at children, or it's, well, I don't think it is aimed at children, but sorry, Alex, do you get that?
Yeah, I get that. I even get that from children, and I did have somebody say to me, oh, it's really patronising that you're playing with dolls, and I kind of thinking, well, the only dolls are in the baptism story, and I don't understand where you got the dolls from, but that was what they'd taken from the words godly play, and I guess trying to explain to people that what you're doing is inviting God as the Trinity, you know, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, to come and play in the circle of your community. it is actually quite difficult, and there is quite a lot of resistance to those words. But trying to think of different words to describe that, and I'm really sorry, I have left it. I did a workshop over last weekend, and I've left my resources, but there's a book called Nurturing Grace by one of the Godly Play Foundation trustees about godly play with adults. And she suggests calling it not godly play, but afternoon tea or dessert, or, you know, and I kind of think, is that any better, really? And we're going to try it in Cramond again with our older adults, of which there are quite a few. And we're going to call it reminiscences and use the story to spark conversation and people thinking in community, remembering where they were. You know, I remember the story from when I was a little boy or a little girl, or when I told it to my Sunday school class, or when, you know, so it's just sparking that. But we're going to call it reminiscences, and we are going to do the tea and cake thing as well, which is very important. But yeah, that
it's, yeah. I did the mustard seed with vestry last week, and there was a bit of resistance beforehand, but I called it a different way of entering into scripture using imagination or something, and they all went, oh yeah. But actually it was fantastic. It was, I mean, I don't think I was fantastic, but the response was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Vestry members who never normally speak they got really excited.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't call it godly play. It's funny.
I think it goes back to that. Why are we anxious about talking, even using the word religion or spiritual, when you're in a, you know, when you're training to be something that's going to provide compassionate care? And one of the things that, I mean, you brought it up, was I was wondering if you went to a care home, which I think would pose challenges, because, you know, if you talk about, I mean, you know, religion, we've had people saying we don't do it here, so nobody wants you, or actually being disrespectful of taking every resident to the dining room for worship, and then folding the laundry at the back, which, you know, is just not understanding what might matter to somebody, and that's not fulfilling dignity or compassion or anything. But it's, so if we can't get over the words, how it makes it so much harder to actually get people to think for themselves. So I thought one of your challenges, which I think you just highlighted, would be one, introducing godly play, and how people would choose to join in, because you wouldn't want everyone to join in who didn't have an interest or a connection or something. So I thought that would be quite a big challenge, alongside, even if you called it reminiscence, if the emphasis was going to be on faith, how would you overcome that?
I think the faith question is a really huge taboo. I guess that's just in society as well. It's not just in care homes. You know, you meet that everywhere, where people don't want to speak about their faith. They don't want to speak about their spirituality. In fact, some people will tell you that spirituality is a dreadful thing, which is, you know, really a bit odd. But in a care home, you really are hostage to the staff, if that's the right word. You know, you're reliant on people being brought to the circle because they maybe can't walk in themselves, so they have to be brought. And you don't know who you're going to get, because it might just be that the care home staff do need to fold the laundry or clean a room or do something. So they've put this person into the circle who doesn't have a particularly strong faith, just so that they have time. So yeah, it's a difficult situation, and you don't necessarily know that that's exactly what's happening to you at all. Although I have stood in a care home just along from Holy Corner, and or been in a circle and looked up at the wondering to find that there's twice as many staff as there are residents waiting to wonder and thinking, okay, so this might be what they need today. But that was really interesting. And then a care home manager opening the door and saying, you know, because it had been an incident that somebody needed to go out, and very sheepish care home staff going out to deal with it. But that was really interesting. And that was about the third or fourth time we'd been into that care home, and just gradually more and more staff came in.
I don't want to hog it, I want to let other people talk, but I think I'm in a particular, well, Maureen knows the home that I'm involved with, and the resistance is opposite to that, because Godly Place seems, they're quite happy to have one-to-one or a couple of residents, you know, to sit informally. The staff think that's a good thing. I think they see the person-centered, the relationship, the story. The resistance we have at the moment is if we try to hold a service, a worship service, the staff are saying, oh, but we might be forced to join in and we don't want to join in. And because the new rules say you have to have a certain number of carers per you have to have two carers per 6 residents. You know, we have more problem getting the staff to come into the worship services. I think they're frightened they might be secretly subverted in some way. But Godly Place seems to be a different experience with the staff. They seem to think that's, I think they just walk past and see it as more relationship, story, companionship. Does that make sense? Anyway.
Yeah, it does to me, having seen that happen. Yeah. But you need the staff there.
You have
Margaret
to.
And, yeah. Margaret and I were left with no staff one day, and somebody in quite advanced dementia that we didn't realize just how advanced the dementia was, ate a marble.
Yeah.
They wanted to play with marbles, and you know, because they looked like sweeties, and we hadn't really understood that. So I think that there's also, from our point of view, I would have said before I started working with Godly Play in care homes that I had quite a good understanding, because that's where I began my working life, was in a care home with people with dementia. So, you know, but I obviously didn't remember the stuff from when I was 16 or 17 or
scary. I know.
Yes, because you know, it was,
I think that's
40 years ago.
a really important point, that it's not a one-way relationship. You know, you can't just, well, as all of you will know, you can't just charge into a care home and say, I'll do this, it's an activity or whatever it is. You have to understand how it works, and what the dynamics are to a large extent, and how what you take in can fit, because otherwise it becomes a sort of conflictual relationship, which is not, you know, what you want at all. It's, you know, there has to be a mutual understanding and respect for what you would like to achieve with individuals, and how the care home runs, and vice, you know, so it's a twofold thing, but so that you don't get excluded if you go in with good support for folk. So.
And you need to fit round the other activities. You know, there are things like Friday afternoon film is really important, that everybody comes and watches a film on a Friday afternoon, and you know, just fitting in with the schedule. I mean, some care homes have such good activities for people. It can be difficult.
Thank goodness if they are now, because for so long there was nothing.
Yeah.
We had a year and a half of
I haven't been into a care home since the before times, so I don't know how difficult it's going to be.
It's really difficult. We're still only allowed, the Scottish Government regulations still only allow a maximum of 2 volunteers with a group of residents, which, you know, there's not very many.
No.
Does anyone else have something they'd like to? Oh, we've got a new joiner, Caroline, with a wonderful dog.
Yeah, this is Poppy. I did have a question. Yes, you're talking a lot about care homes. I just wondered about working with older people in the community as well, because obviously a lot of the elderly people have been very isolated and are still pretty isolated. So that's the sort of thing that interests me, is work, you know, getting people together, perhaps church people, to just, Jane and I worked together at Christchurch before, and we had some older people that came and did godly play, and although some were quite resistant, they really got into it, didn't they, Jane?
They really, yeah, it's experience, isn't it? I mean, I think,
yeah. So that's the sort of thing I'm interested in. And Maureen, you talked a lot about, you know, what staff thought and what the research said. Is there a lot of research done with asking individuals themselves what they think and want for their spiritual lives?
There's a lot of research that does that, and certainly in the we've always tried to talk to residents about this, because it's about them. But I think we've had to sort of say our focus for some of the research has been on enabling staff to understand in order to interpret. So I think that's been critically important. I'm really interested in your question about community, because I think there's a lot going on in different congregations to support older people that just doesn't, you know, come up to the surface as much as it should do. A long time ago, we did a survey of churches to see, it was about a policy, and the thing that came up was we need to understand more about dementia, because that is one of the critical issues in our congregation, because congregations are getting older, and people withdraw, and not just the person, but the person who, family member or friend who cares for them. So, but when I look around, there are many churches together or individually who are supporting older people. I can think of my own church has something. I mean, I could tell you lots of different examples of, and what I'd like to encourage is inclusion. So how can we help congregations be inclusive of those who have challenging behavior, who have dementia, you know, maybe, you know, can't settle, all those sorts of things. How to include people, say, with learning difficulties, be part of a welcoming team. So lots of super examples. And how do we get that out so that it's sort of stimulating for others? I know 1 or 2 churches have got specific workers for older people, and we had a seminar earlier this week. I think, Alex, you were there, weren't you? Did you come?
I didn't, but I did
Yes.
register. Yes.
No, because what they were saying is it's very often it's youth work gets the attention, and yet most of the congregation is older. But we're very anxious about the future, so but we can't seem to do it together. So it seems to be either or, and we need to sort of look at how we create opportunities for older people by older people. So it's with, isn't it? But
we have a pastoral care assistant who is so we do not have a children's and youth worker, because most of our congregation, most of the population of the parish is over 90. You know, we have the highest over 90 rate in the whole of Scotland, or over 90s of population. So we do have a pastoral care assistant who was hoping to be at this workshop this morning, but she can catch up with it later on. And she is really active in looking for things for people to do, and was kind of instrumental in putting together our reminiscences group using Godly Play. But you know, cafes and chats and just being available the whole time to people, and having visiting groups, which is actually at the moment telephone calls rather than actually physically visiting people.
Mm-hmm.
I think Caroline's point's a good one about people isolated in the community, older people who are still very anxious. It might not be the dementia thing, it's people who don't want to come back to church yet, or people who you do put on a coffee, you know, just a chat or a meet, and they're still not really sure, but they're not really sure they want you to visit them in their home either. You know, I don't know quite how that will move forward. I don't know if Caroline, are you?
Well, what we're looking at going back to, we did during lockdown, we did coffee mornings, virtual ones. So we were looking at maybe doing that for the people who still don't feel they can come to church. Most of them do go online, but again, there's some who don't go online. But there are quite a number of our church who are not yet going to church because they don't feel safe.
We've almost got everyone back now. The three that I'm trying to visit, it's quite difficult for me, I think. The three that have high level dementia and in homes, because I have no former relationship with them, they don't recognize me from, you know, because it's a new, and that's quite hard. So that's where, yeah. But the rest we have actually managed to get most of them back a bit super cautious, but it is difficult. They're very lonely.
And a lot of older people are just they don't want the technology. You know, they don't want a smartphone, they don't want an iPad, they don't want a computer. They don't want to deal with any of that, and that's really difficult as well. And they don't feel that there's a connection through these things anyway.
Yes.
I think loneliness is, you know, and if families are away as well, and you can't go into other people's houses, and you're frightened to go to church, because you've promised your family you will not get COVID by going out and partying when you're 85. I'm just thinking about my mother here. You know, but you also won't have a smartphone. It is so difficult to continue with that relationship, you know, that and to do that. And we can't even persuade her to have a dog. You know, dogs of Godly Play.
But I think we're also experiencing people who were maybe church. That's a message that we're getting back a lot, but also day centres and other activities. The sort of consequence of the pandemic is people's mobility is also reduced because, you know, they weren't being able to go out, and now their physical confidence is not good, as well as I don't want to get COVID either, you know. So we've got this. It's going to take quite a lot, I think, to get most people back. But we've got a little day centre in the village I live in, and I'm very pleased that more people are joining now. We can't have them all every day, but more people want to come and have that companionship. But a challenge, I think, and which I think, you know, Godly Play is what activities do people really want? You know, not everybody wants to. Men don't necessarily want to chat as much as women. That's a great stereotype, I know, but it's people have told us that women like to chat, whereas men like to do. So that's where men's sheds come into account. So how do we encompass those sort of different interests, you know, depending on people's very varied capacity in one setting? Any?
Yeah, I was told that if you have old gentlemen in your district and you're going to visit, then it's very good to be able to speak about football, except that none of the old gentlemen in my district want to speak about football, and I know nothing about rugby. But in a godly play setting, being able to take along things that are made of wood. We had a gentleman who came to a godly play circle who was in the latter stages of dementia when we first met him, whose father had been a joiner and had made him things. And so he was desperate to work with the Noah's Ark, which was wooden, and take it apart because it really sparked the memories of his father. So he began to speak about his father. So just, I guess, having different things that people can work with is really helpful from a godly play point of view.
Yeah.
But generally, I struggle, and I can't take marbles with me anymore. I can't take pretty coloured beads with me anymore. I know that the godly play, the animals in the ark look like biscuits, so people want to eat them. So it's really difficult to know what.
We've just restarted the craft and chat group that we had before on a Friday afternoon, and we finished with Compline or some sort of prayer. But it hasn't happened yet. This Friday, we're going to run a simple book group alongside it, which seems to have been signed up by the men. So the craft and chat's all women and the book group's nearly all men. But choosing a simple book, actually, it doesn't seem, I don't know, we haven't done it yet, but it feels like it doesn't really matter if they've read the book or not. They can just come and sit in a circle and be quiet and feel they're part of. That's our hope anyway. Because what else, you're right, I mean, what else can you offer, really?
But that's a sense of purpose, isn't it? It's going to the book group on a Friday afternoon. That's part of my structure of the week. And I've got a book which I can read the first chapter or not, exactly like,
And then the two groups will come together for 10 minutes prayer at the end, maybe, or whatever, and feel it's sort of, well, it's trying to rebuild some community. Because to be honest, what we've lost most of all is community. It's been Sunday morning sitting apart in a mask, not encouraged not to talk to people. And if you're a bit deaf and you're trying to talk to people at a distance, we seem to have lost the day-to-day interaction. That's what we need to rebuild, really.
Yes.
And not just with people with dementia or even very older people, although I think it's mostly the older men who have expressed the most loneliness where I am. That seems to be the.
So it's getting to know
time. It took 18 months to get into this situation. I think it's going to be at least double that to get back out again. I don't know.
Anyone else got any ideas to put in? Liz, do you want to say something? Hi. Yes? She's gone. Hello, yes. Slightly going in and out.
Is that internet connection?
Yes.
Okay. Liz, can you maybe type it in the chat? Does that work? That might be.
No, I don't really. I've been listening, because the quite interesting.
Sadly, we can't hear you, Liz.
And using godly play with older. Probably more into
Fiona, do you have
sorry.
anything you'd like to?
I'm interested.
I can't really hear Liz at all, I'm afraid.
No,
can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we
Yes.
can. Yes.
My interest is that I'm a hospital chaplaincy volunteer, and I also used to do,
No,
I was a
came to
children's worker.
and I've really enjoyed.
And I can, I'm now training to be a butterfly. Do you know the butterfly system?
For children's hospice.
Well, this is for adults. I won't be
All right.
allowed to work with children, but it's a butterfly volunteer, and I'm going to be trained to be with end of life patients who are in hospitals. So they're not in hospices, they'll be in the hospital. I live in Norwich. And I love the respect and the love of godly play, and I know it well. I just wanted to find out from you if there was anything that any way of bringing godly play into being a butterfly.
I suspect that's more a question for Alex and colleagues than for me. I mean, you can see the possibilities. I think they're very distinct possibilities. And I think to have you as a volunteer within the hospital for those at end of life would be so important, because there are just not enough chaplains. And that was one of the things that we looked at, 9 of the long stay units in Lothian, where I'm based. And the staff said, we really need more. And the volunteer who came in was a Catholic nun, and it wasn't about Catholicism or anything like that. She was they really relied on her because she supported them as much as the people who needed end of life support and care. So I think it's wonderful what you do, and we need more of you.
Well, I'm just training, so
yeah.
Thank you.
But
I kind of wonder if I was just kind of wondering from a godly play point of view. Go on, Maureen, and I can say the godly play bit in a minute.
No, you say. I was going to say Alex will tell you more about godly play.
I kind of just wonder if it's a bit like going into schools in Scotland. So I don't know if you know Myra and Laura in Oban, but yeah, you do. So they just volunteered for everything. It wasn't about doing godly play. It was about just being there and being visible and building the relationship. So if there's a coffee morning, they would say, we'll make a cake, or we'll come and serve coffee, or let us run a stall. Which stall would you like us to run? They weren't saying, well, we'll do this or that. So that they were really building a relationship. And I suspect that being in hospitals and care homes and with people might be a bit like that. I guess it's just that at the moment it's so difficult, like Jane says, 2 volunteers at the moment. It is really difficult to do that, but the time will come when we can do that a bit more. And so it might not be about godly play, it might just be building that relationship and being there for people and spending time with them when they get their cup of tea or they want to chat. And then you know, when that relationship's built, can I tell you a story? Yeah, it might be a bit like that.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that I won't be able to tell stories
No.
because these people are end of life. I mean, and their relatives won't be ready. Maybe, who knows? Who knows? But certainly the godly play approach, I think, is really good. It's really important.
But remember that Jerome developed some of these stories working in a pediatric hospital with children who were end of life. And Robin spoke about it last night in her talk.
Oh, I missed that.
Yes, it is recorded. But you know, about palliative care and how certainly with children, they were much more ready for what was happening than parents were. And I know that Rebecca Nye has taken godly play into hospitals with children who are in really dire situations, and she's told a story on a bed. So how do you do that? Which story? You know, a desert story is maybe not the story to take it into an ICU unit, but you know, that is the kind of people that she's been working with. So but I could take a parable in, I could take the circle of the church here in, but sand is maybe, a desert bag is maybe not the thing to take in. But yeah, actually sitting beside somebody and telling a story on their bed and being, you know, we do godly play in community, but that isn't always possible. So one-to-one. And even godly play circles sometimes are only one child, one adult that you're working with, and you would still tell the story for them if they were coming to the circle. And the story's for you, you take it where you are anyway. So yeah, I would think about offering that, but also families may need that as well. I have had somebody say that they needed a story that they could work through a death with, and they asked that question of Jerome, and he said, work with the Good Shepherd.
Yeah.
Work through the Good Shepherd and the dark and dangerous places. That's the story. And that was a story that he took to children, because he was most interested in children. But yeah, I think that was adults that he was asked about, and that was his answer, still the Good Shepherd. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
yeah, I think the Good Shepherd has a lot to offer, and I think one-to-one, or as you say, just reacting to the families, I've heard of somebody in near Cambridge who takes the Good Shepherd little boxes in and leaves them with the patients. So I'd like to find out about that as well. But thank you.
Yeah, Bowthorpe do actually make but they're really lovely little the Stories of God at Home boxes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you very much for your comments. That was really, really interesting, really inspiring. I have a whole page of notes. I will add, Fiona's got a whole page of notes as well. I will add the slides up into Hoover probably this afternoon, probably not just now, but probably this afternoon. And yes, thank you all for joining us.
Thanks very much, Maureen.